Norish expressed her embarrassment at being overheard, exclaiming that she couldn't just forget about it. She complained about being so troubled she couldn't sleep, pointing to the bags under her eyes while Almark reacted with surprise. Almark recalled that he knew Norish was good at wind magic, to her surprise. The group discussed the windborne message spell, which Norish admitted she was still practicing, making it unstable. Norish explained that the windborne message spell sends words on the wind to someone far away, and a skilled caster can even send it across the sea. However, she noted it's a difficult spell because if the person isn't at the intended location when the wind arrives, the message won't reach them. Almark, with Wendy listening, questioned why Norish would use that kind of magic to scatter pointless chatter around the maze. Almark and Norish began to argue, with Almark insisting the chatter was pointless and Norish retorting about being judged. Wendy stepped in, telling them to stop fighting. Almark directly asked Norish why she would send a windborne message to the statue of Lord Valak. Norish nervously replied that it was nothing. Almark, unconvinced, accused her of lying, stating there was no deep reason. Almark thoughtfully explained that from what he heard, the way Norish talked felt like her voice was gentle and very friendly. He continued, observing it was like she was talking to her grandfather, causing Norish to react with a jolt. Norish was visibly flustered by Almark's accurate deduction. Almark bluntly asked if Norish was Lord Valak's grandchild, an idea Norish quickly refuted, calling him an idiot. Norish remarked to Almark that he was a strange person, as it felt like he could see through everything. Wendy then interjected, asking Almark if they had time to go to the garden again. Norish then suggested they continue their conversation elsewhere. The group proceeded towards the garden. Norish began her explanation, stating that when she was in her first year and in class 3 with Eston and Balwa, she was a crybaby and was often bullied. She recounted how she would talk back as if she were tough, but would cry so easily that her bullies found it amusing and teased her every day. It was always hard and frustrating for her, so she cried a lot. She added that her roommate Lilte always seemed so lonely, and Norish didn't want Lilte to witness her tears. Almark listened intently, recalling that Lilte had once told him that in her first year she missed her parents and used to cry secretly every night. Norish continued, explaining that one day, on a whim, she decided to wander into the maze, thinking she could cry there without anyone seeing. Norish explained that her plan to cry in the maze didn't last, as boys eventually started using it for playing. But she then revealed she made an amazing discovery there back then. That discovery, she explained to Almark, Wendy, and Muzin, was the statue of Lord Valak. She admitted she had never really paid attention to it before, but that's when she noticed it for the first time. She realized with a fond memory that the statue looked just like her beloved grandfather. Her grandfather, she reminisced, was the happiest when she got accepted into the academy, but he passed away before she could enroll. Norish explained that every time something bad happened, she came to see the statue, her grandpa, and continued to do so even after she grew older and cried less. She confessed she just wanted her grandpa to hear about her day, the content being unimportant, and this place became the destination for the windborne message spell she'd been practicing. She revealed that every evening after dinner, she sent the message from her window on the wind. Wendy, with Almark nearby, realized that Norish's spell was the mysterious voice they had heard. Norish expressed her surprise that Almark had figured it out back then, commenting on his ability to even feel the wind. Almark explained that since the maze is surrounded by hedges, the wind can only pass close to the ground. He continued, saying that based on the garden's layout with gently sloping features, he thought the wind sent by Norish would gather at the central plaza, even if not from a magical perspective. Wendy chimed in, calling Almark's deduction amazing and his point of view important. Norish chuckled, finding it amusing that her actions had turned into a ghost story-like rumor, and teased Almark about rethinking his practice. Nelson reacted with disbelief, questioning if it was all just magic practice. Wendy told Nelson not to say it like that. Almark thoughtfully considered Norish practicing magic and talking to her grandpa as fine, though he seemed to ponder something more. Norish turned to Nelson and said that if he had a story, they would love to hear it too. She mentioned Eston and Balwa, wondering about them, and expressed her excitement for the upcoming martial arts tournament. Nelson, however, brusquely stated it was a waste of time and urged them to head back. Almark gently chided Nelson, telling him he didn't need to be so harsh. Wendy then spoke to Almark, recalling that when they had arrived earlier, the light magic had been flickering. The narration revealed that upon hearing Norish was bullied, Nelson had become genuinely angry. Norish realized that Nelson's earlier reaction was his form of emotional turmoil and his way of showing friendship, though it was difficult to understand. She reminisced about a time when she was a first year crying in the maze, Nelson, who was in a different class and just some kid she didn't know, had talked to her once, inviting her to play hide-and-seek together. She recalled being so surprised that she turned him down, but admitted that she had been happy about the gesture. Smiling warmly, Norish resolved that from now on, maybe she should talk to Nelson more often. Nelson declared he was fine and would head home first, instructing Almark to see Wendy and Norish off properly, despite Almark's attempt to stop him. After Nelson departed, Wendy giggled and remarked that he was gone. Wendy then turned to Almark and Norish, suggesting they should also head home. Later, Almark and Muzin stood by a window, with Muzin noting that summer vacation was 2 whole months, and that's why everyone was going back to their hometowns, often picked up by their parents on the first day. Almark internally noted that several months had passed since entering the academy, but so far he had only been allowed to meditate despite being told not to rush. He confessed to himself that when he saw his classmates improving their magic in practical lessons, he couldn't help but wonder what he was even doing. Muzin continued, mentioning that there were people like Norish who were tackling advanced magic on their own. Muzin also recalled that Torque's magic during the Jaren incident had been amazing too. Muzin noticed Almark seemed lost in thought and asked if he was listening. Almark apologized, and Muzin, with a sigh, began to ask his question. Muzin asked Almark what he planned to do for the vacation and if he was going back to his hometown. Almark explained to Muzin that if he were to go back north for vacation, the earliest he could return to the academy would be in a year, and he didn't even know his dad's current whereabouts. Muzin realized this meant Almark didn't have anywhere to go back to. Almark confirmed that staying in the dorm was his only option. Muzin, overjoyed, exclaimed that he wasn't alone, much to Almark's surprise. Muzin had thought he'd be the only one not going home, and wondered what they were supposed to do alone for 2 months. Almark clarified that even so, he had to practice meditation every day and couldn't hang out all the time. Muzin cheerfully acknowledged this, then explained his family didn't have much money. Almark then questioned why Muzin wasn't going home, as his family was from the Galai Kingdom. Muzin explained he was the son of a woodcutter from a village in the western Galai Kingdom, and being a woodcutter didn't earn much. When he enrolled, his family received a pension. Thanks to the pension, he could go home previously, but his little sister was born this year, and he needed to earn money for her food and care. He showed Almark a letter indicating his parents couldn't come to pick him up this year, remarking that it couldn't be helped. Almark suggested that in that case, he guessed he'd hang out with Muzin every now and then, to which Muzin looked forward. Wendy arrived, asking what the two were talking about. Muzin explained they were discussing summer vacation and Wendy's plans to go to the royal capital with her parents on the first day. Almark then asked if the Burherb family's land wasn't a little further north. Wendy explained that she saw on a library map that her father was now also a minister of the kingdom and lived in the royal capital, with the magistrate governing their territory. Almark then inquired about Wallace, while Muzin mused that Wendy, being a lady, was expected to go and wondered if anyone else was staying. It was mentioned that the Mosville family, Wallace's family, was at the far western edge of Gallo, and Wallace was likely going home. Almark recalled seeing the Mosville estate, noting it took a long time to travel there using the royal carriage along the King's Road. Almark added that he also saw the Mosville estate on that map. It was a small estate in a place one could call the frontier. Muzin remarked that it seemed it was just him and Almark not going home, and expressed surprise that the Mosville family's status wasn't as high as Wendy's or Torque's, as he'd thought they were higher-ranking nobles. Muzin then excitedly asked Almark if he was also staying in the dorm, picturing them fishing together every day until they got bored. Almark confirmed to Wendy and Muzin that his home was too far away after all. Wendy suddenly had an idea. She brightly proposed that both Almark and Muzin come to her house, explaining that if it's to Garunther, they could get there in 2 days. Wendy added that if their schedules aligned, they could stay for about 10 days, an idea that made Muzin ask if that was okay, clearly thrilled. Muzin delightedly exclaimed and urged Almark to go with Wendy, saying they had to go. Almark apologized, explaining that it wasn't that it was a bother, but he had meditation training. Almark felt conflicted, weighing the fun challenge of a mansion of trials with Wendy against the time pressure and his inability to use magic, while Wendy suggested he could meditate on the way. Muzin desperately pleaded with Almark to go, exclaiming he couldn't go to Garunther by himself, while Wendy gently told Almark not to push himself. Wendy added that it was just an idea she had, as Almark looked conflicted. Almark then clarified that he never said he wouldn't go. He was just thinking that 10 days might be too much of a bother and suggested they could come back in 5 days instead. With the plan settled, Almark, Muzin, and Wendy cheered, looking forward to the best summer vacation ever, though a trial awaited them first. Muzin seriously told Almark to listen up, as these exams were important, and remedial classes during the break would affect their vacation plans. Muzin passionately declared they absolutely must not get grades that would make them take remedial classes, especially to go to Wendy's mansion, holding up a supportive banner for Almark. Muzin tried to reassure Almark that magic could be done with sheer willpower, but Almark seemed unconvinced about his magic practice. Muzin noticed Layla studying and mentioned her to Almark. Muzin then asked Almark if Layla was also good with her exam scores. Almark recalled the impressive second-year end-of-year exam scores where Wallace was first, Wendy fourth, and Layla fifth. Muzin then sheepishly admitted he was fourth from the bottom, prompting Almark to realize Muzin was the one in danger of summer school. Muzin asserted that while his rank was lower, he didn't have a single subject requiring summer school, unlike Nelson who, despite ranking higher, was still acting superior. Muzin confidently stated that even when flying low, he never crashed, prompting Almark to consider that he might not be able to go to the mansion if his scores were poor. Almark remembered it was the first exam study session of his life, and as he was flustered and unsure, Wendy had stepped in to help him. He recalled feeling bad and hesitating to accept her help. Wendy had reassured him, saying to tell her if it was a bother and stuck by him, which also benefited her own studies. Almark mused that all he could offer Wendy in return were trivial things from his journey, wondering what he could do for her as Wendy noticed his lack of focus. Professor Ilmes approached Almark, who apologized for his distraction. Professor Ilmes remarked that Almark's difficulty concentrating didn't seem to be solely due to exam studies, showing remarkable insight. Almark, impressed by Professor Ilmes's understanding, confessed that his distraction was indeed about Wendy. Almark explained to Professor Ilmes that Wendy helped him study daily, but he felt he had nothing to offer in return for her kindness, though this topic wasn't the professor's specialty. He admitted that thinking about it made his chest hurt and that he wanted to do something for her. Professor Ilmes acknowledged that Almark acted so mature he sometimes forgot he was still just an 11-year-old boy. Professor Ilmes then gently asked Almark if, to put it simply, he liked Wendy. Almark confessed to his sensei that he didn't really understand what like or dislike meant, as he had never experienced that kind of world before. Professor Ilmes advised that if he didn't understand, he could start learning from now on, comparing it to learning magic. Professor Ilmes encouraged Almark not to be afraid, to take his time to truly examine the feeling, and to consider it a conversation with himself, to which Almark agreed. Professor Ilmes gently poked Almark's chest, referring to the pain Almark mentioned, and advised him to treasure that feeling. Almark looked thoughtful as the professor told him to remember the emotion he was currently feeling. Professor Ilmes added that as Almark lived his life as a magician, knowing that feeling would carry great importance. The professor also reminded Almark not to forget about Wendy's feelings, suggesting she didn't think he was a bother and genuinely wanted to help him. Professor Ilmes then posed a question. If Wendy were in trouble, would Almark be happy to help her, and would he consider that a burden? Almark affirmed he would help and wouldn't see it as a burden. Professor Ilmes then prompted Almark to consider why Wendy might not feel the same way about helping him. Reiterating that this kind of advice wasn't his specialty, Professor Ilmes decided to move on from the topic. Professor Ilmes stated it was time to continue, explaining that a good magician can separate negative emotions when using magic, regardless of their mental state. Returning to the lesson, Professor Ilmes began to explain, as mentioned before, that the current shape of the world owes much to two of the 8 inner pillars. Professor Ilmes, now in a classroom setting, asked if everyone remembered the lesson and requested the names of the 2 significant inner pillars. Almark thought to himself, here we go again, acknowledging he had gotten used to the Academy's lessons but was not good at world theory. The professor explained the concept of the Great Four, which could be considered the world itself, the 8 inner pillars that created the world as it is now, and the 16 lesser pillars that govern various phenomena. Almark, looking out the window, reflected that the shape of the world he knew was completely different, and noted that not a single name of the northern gods was mentioned in this theory. Professor Ilmes mentioned the hero god Hardika, who sacrificed himself to illuminate the world, and the proud goddess Luhinik, who remained in the farthest sky as a guiding beacon for the people, before calling on Torque. Torque stood up to answer. Torque identified 2 of the pillars as the steadfast Ekrundr and the graceful Sumasine. Professor Ilmes confirmed Torque was correct, explaining that steadfast Ekrundr created the land, and graceful Sumasine was said to have created the sea. She continued that the other 6 pillars and the 16 lesser pillars that influence the world also have their own names, then asked Norish and Lilte to each provide 2 representative names. Norish confidently provided two names, the two-faced Izumagu and the meteor Almedas. Professor Ilmes then prompted Lilte to continue. Lilte, with Norish's whispered interpretation in progress, named the one-armed Volska and the undying Crusfolk. Professor Ilmes thanked them both. Norish let out a sigh of relief, and the professor commented that she remembered well. Professor Ilmes then stated that, speaking of names, there was one entity among the Lesser 16 without a name, and called upon Layla. Layla responded affirmatively. Layla correctly identified the entity as the god who governs darkness, which Professor Ilmes confirmed. Professor Ilmes elaborated that this god has many titles and the reason it lacks a name is unknown, then asked Wendy to provide one of these titles. Wendy provided the title, the Lord of the Dark Abyss. Almark listened, feeling as though he had heard that phrase somewhere recently. Professor Ilmes noted that they had all been reviewing well, though wondered if Almark's familiarity was just his imagination. Professor Ilmes announced that the weather was getting hotter and exams would start in a few days, cautioning the students to be careful not to overdo their studies. After class, Almark sighed, remarking that if they were up north, it would already be full-on summer, but at least the breeze made it manageable. Muzin complained that studying for exams on such a nice day was boring, a sentiment Almark agreed with, though Muzin declared he was already full and could still eat more. Nelson, feeling the heat, declared it made him want to go to the forest and dive into the river, with Muzin agreeing that was the spirit. Nelson suggested they just head to the forest today, inviting Almark along and insisting one day wouldn't hurt. Nelson tried to persuade a hesitant Almark, wondering if Professor Ilmes might let them do meditation for remedial lessons if it was just for a day. Almark expressed his uncertainty as it was his first exam and he didn't know how to handle it, while Wallace Fia off-screen told Nelson to stop and assured Almark he'd be fine. Norish and Lilte discussed Almark's situation, noting he had just arrived a short while ago and was trying to learn in a few months what they had spent 2 years studying. Nelson exclaimed he forgot about that, while Wallace Fia acknowledged Almark had it rough. Almark mentioned that Wendy always helped him, and Wendy humbly replied that she wasn't doing anything special. Nelson suggested to Muzin that they should just go on their own, but Muzin, with a sudden realization, said no, he thought he'd pass after all. Nelson was exasperated, exclaiming they had been through this before, as Muzin apologized, explaining he remembered something important for summer vacation and absolutely couldn't afford remedial classes. Almark grumbled that he wasn't in the mood to study on such a beautiful day, while Norish commented it was a waste of a beautiful day and that in Almark's case, he'd probably still say that even if it rained. Almark cursed his situation, wishing he were as smart as Wallace Fia walked by. Wallace Fia approached, asking Almark what was the matter. When Almark explained he was saying if he were as smart as Wallace, he'd be out having fun too, Wallace Fia simply questioned why Almark didn't just go. Wallace Fia encouraged Almark not to hold back, suggesting that even the forest might offer some lessons. Wallace Fia continued, pointing out that with exams approaching, even the first years were likely studying hard in the school building or dorms. He playfully suggested Almark would probably be the only one playing in the forest and could have the stream all to himself, which made Almark pause. Norish commented to Lilte that it was classic Wallace, telling Almark to go as a way to stop him, as Wallace Fia thought Almark should go if he really wanted to. Wallace Fia then told Almark that as long as he was prepared to take responsibility for the consequences of his actions, he could do whatever he wanted. Almark, with renewed determination, declared he would study and focus on studying until the exams too. Almark added he would repay this debt by playing to his heart's content over summer break, to which Wallace Fia dryly remarked that he wasn't repaying anything. Wallace Fia seriously advised Almark to take responsibility for the results of his actions. Almark looked back, puzzled by the advice. As Wallace Fia walked away, he added that if Almark moved, he would make waves. Almark called out, "Let's do this, Almark," seemingly to himself, still watching Wallace. Nelson, full of energy, declared that if they were doing it, they would aim for good scores and study like crazy until the exam day. Almark, with determination in his eye, agreed, stating he was looking forward to the exams already. The three boys, Nelson, Almark, and Muzin, rallied together, their primary goal being to avoid remedial classes, with Muzin questioning Almark's sudden enthusiasm for good scores. At last, the day of the test had come. The students, including Almark, focused on their papers, needing to pour all their memorized knowledge onto the answer sheets from subjects like world perspectives, history, and applied magic. The first section, for instance, covered the origin of humanity, a subject requiring understanding over mere emotion. Almark found the test challenging, just as the magician Lettrel had said. Determined not to let Wendy down after her help with his studies, Almark resolved that he could not allow himself to get disappointing scores, with practical exams scheduled for the second day. Students demonstrated their skills in martial arts by performing designated forms and in healing magic by brewing medicinal decoctions within a time limit. After Almark's martial arts demonstration, an instructor remarked that his form resembled a wild wolf imitating a domestic dog and told him he was free to return, leaving Almark looking puzzled. On the third day, during the oral exams and magical practice, examiners posed questions covering magic and general knowledge, such as inquiring about the first king of the Galai kingdom. Almark confidently answered that King Seek was the first and also correctly named the three principalities, Makes, Rang, and Zidal. Quick thinking and composure were essential as hesitation led to point deductions. For Almark, this was a relatively strong area. Fia announced that this was the final test, instructing students to return to the dormitory afterward to prevent leaks, and that she would call their names one by one. Students anxiously wondered what question would be given once the test was over. As Nelson was called, Almark clasped his hands, feeling that all he could rely on was the magic cultivated through meditation. Muzin, noticing Almark's anxiety, told him to stay calm and that he would see him later. Wendy offered words of encouragement, telling Almark it would be okay and to believe in what he had accomplished so far. Almark pondered Wendy's words, questioning what he had truly done. When Torque was called, he thought to himself that even if told to believe, there was nothing to believe in. It was just meditation. Torque walked towards the exam, feeling he had really only meditated. Torque turned to Almark, asking why he needed to be nervous as if he were someone important, and questioned if Almark thought he could actually do something. Waving goodbye, Torque departed for his exam. Almark internally admitted it wasn't about wanting good grades, but more than anything, he didn't want to give up and end up in remedial classes. Wendy, meanwhile, was filled with anxiety, scared of being let down and desperately not wanting to disappoint herself, realizing that soon only she and Almark would remain. Almark called out to Deg. Almark remarked that Deg was lucky and top of the class, praising his amazing levitation spell. Deg looked down, confessing he didn't have any magic he could use and felt jealous. Almark apologized to Deg for his earlier jealousy, acknowledging Deg also had a test, but Deg admitted he was, in fact, jealous of Almark. Almark was puzzled when Deg mentioned that the teacher always said what you can see isn't that important. Just then, Deg was called for his exam and reminded Almark not to forget his belongings. Deg informed Almark that everyone thought so. They envied Almark, even Layla and Wallace. Almark questioned why they would envy him. The examiner, Fia, called Almark, informing him he was the last one and to remember his belongings. Almark wondered what Deg meant by Layla and Wallace envying him. He admitted to himself that he didn't understand Deg's meaning. Almark mused whether figuring out Deg's statement would provide a hint for the upcoming test. Dismissing the thought that Deg knew the test's content, Almark decided to face whatever question was presented head-on. He steeled his resolve, determined not to concede defeat from the outset. Almark entered the examination area, introduced himself, and Fia confirmed he was the last from Group 2, asking him to take care. Fia placed a single stone on the floor and announced the beginning of the test. She then instructed Almark to demonstrate the results of his lessons using the stone. Almark was taken aback, questioning what. He felt he had no such results to show, but knew he had to do something. Overwhelmed, Almark wondered what he should do with the stone, as the instructor hadn't given any specifics, unlike Deg, who would have effortlessly made it float. Almark imagined his classmates, Torque, Norish, skilled at wind magic, Lilte, Nelson, Wendy, who could do anything with transformation, and Wallace, who might carve patterns. He then remembered that Torque had taught him stone carving magic, though at the time he couldn't even chip a single fragment. Almark thought that perhaps now he could achieve some results and considered trying. Professor Ilmi's Fia sternly told Almark to make up his mind. Almark affirmed he would do it, deciding to use the one magic spell he had been taught. Kneeling before the stone, Almark declared he would show Professor Ilmi's the fruits of his meditation, and that even he could perform stone carving magic now. Almark closed his eyes, took a deep breath to feel the magic within his body, and visualized gathering the magic at the tip of his wand, then exhaling sharply while picturing the stone being struck. He affirmed to himself that all that remained was to cast the spell. Suddenly, he wondered why he was getting nervous now and questioned if he could really cast the spell as is, all to repay Wendy. A memory of Wendy's reassuring voice telling him it was fine surfaced. He recalled Wendy encouraging him to believe in what he had done so far. Muzin's advice to stay calm also came to mind. He remembered Torque questioning if he even had a reason to be nervous or if he thought he was capable of something, and Deg mentioning what the professor always said. Almark had a revelation. Everyone, including Torque, Wendy, Muzin, and Deg, had been trying to teach him that what you can see isn't all that important, and he was the only one who hadn't understood. He realized the answer had been within him all along, as a subtle energy emanated from the stone. Facing Professor Ilmi's Fia, Almark stated that the result of his lessons was this meditation, and he would now do what he was capable of. As Almark meditated, he could feel the purity and quality of his internal magic rising, understanding that this was true meditation. He acknowledged to himself that he had never been so focused before and decided that was enough. Professor Ilmi's Fia confessed that initially she had wondered what Almark was attempting to do. Almark explained that he had lost his composure for a moment, but at the last second, remembered everyone's words urging him to do what he could. Fia remarked that it was a close call, as she had been considering making him take extra meditation classes throughout the summer break if he had started engraving magic then. She clarified that life is full of challenges, but this test was about demonstrating what he had learned in class, not gambling on something untried. Fia acknowledged Almark's intelligence, noting he could devise seemingly correct answers with a bit of thought. She advised him to never forget to be grateful to the friends around him, to which Almark agreed. When Almark asked if this was a warning, Fia explained these words were meant for his future self, for when he reached far greater heights than them, and Almark affirmed he understood how she felt. Professor Ilmi's Fia praised Almark, stating his meditation was good and a result of his efforts, impressed by his refinement in such a short time. Almark was visibly surprised and moved when Fia announced that once the break was over, she would begin teaching him magic. She encouraged him to work on refining his meditation even more during the break, and Almark eagerly agreed. Lost in thought, Almark reached out, thinking of his father and how, after a long road, the son of a northern mercenary was finally going to learn magic. A knocking sound startled Almark from his reverie. Muzin peeked in, asking Almark what he was doing and why he had taken off his robe. Muzin urged Almark to hurry, saying they needed to go to the garden quickly or it would start. Nelson burst in, yelling at Almark and Muzin that they were seriously going to be late. The three boys, Nelson, Muzin, and Almark, hastily ran up the stairs, with Nelson exclaiming that no one was left and it was too quiet, urging them to run. Almark, still putting on his robe, asked what was going on, and Nelson exasperatedly replied that they were the very last ones. Nelson and Muzin argued, Nelson blaming Muzin for forgetting to call Almark and falling asleep, while Muzin defended himself, saying it was after the test. Almark urged them on, saying they were almost there as they ran through the woods. Norish and Lilte spotted them, announcing that Almark and the others had finally made it. The trio arrived, greeted by their friends who noted their lateness. Wendy approached Almark, congratulating him on his good work on the test. Almark thanked her, saying he felt he managed thanks to Wendy, but she insisted it was all due to his effort. Wendy expressed her happiness at his words, while Almark reiterated that she was the one who taught him how to put in the effort. Muzin chimed in, asking Almark if he hadn't heard from him about what was about to start, to which Almark replied he hadn't. Norish and Lilte, overhearing, declared that since Almark hadn't heard, they wouldn't tell him either and ran off. Wendy playfully told Almark it was a secret when he asked why not, then urged him to look up, exclaiming that it was coming. Almark looked up in surprise. Almark's eye widened, reflecting the dazzling lights in the sky. Together, Almark and Wendy watched in amazement as beautiful, flower-shaped magical fireworks burst overhead. Magic fireworks filled the sky, marking the end of exams for both the middle and high divisions, a celebration on the last night. It was a tradition for senior students from the high division to launch these magical fireworks to celebrate the end of the exams. Almark and Wendy continued to watch the display with wide eyes. Almark turned to Wendy, exclaiming that it was incredible and that magic was amazing. Wendy, however, asked what he said, as she couldn't hear well because of all the noise. Surrounded by his cheering classmates, Almark mused on magic that could bring smiles to so many, wondering if even he would ever be able to use magic like that. Wendy beamed, suggesting they celebrate together. Almark agreed with a determined look. Nelson spotted Wendy, Almark, and Muzin on a bench and called for them to come over too. The group decided to party all night to celebrate their hard work, with Norish being playfully teased. Almark's exam results showed he placed 25th out of 46 students, with no remedial classes required, a decent outcome for his first exam. The top ranks included Wallace in first place, Layla in fourth, and Wendy in sixth, all doing well. Muzin and Nelson also managed to avoid remedial classes, allowing Almark to look forward to visiting the mansion without worry. The day before vacation, Muzin asked Almark why he was going to everyone's rooms, since they had already met in the classroom. Muzin explained that it was because they wouldn't see everyone for a while starting tomorrow, a sentiment Almark found surprisingly cold for Muzin to say. Almark conceded that it was true, and Muzin, agreeing, dashed off. Norish, seeming a bit exasperated, addressed Almark, Muzin, and Lilte in her room. Almark asked Norish who was coming to pick her up, and she replied it was just her dad. Muzin commented on her packed souvenirs, while Almark noted he and Muzin weren't going home for the break. Almark then turned to Lilte, asking if her parents were coming to pick her up. Lilte puffed out her cheeks in response. Leaning in, Almark playfully asked Lilte why she didn't ask her parents for a new handkerchief. Lilte, extremely flustered, exclaimed. Norish bid Almark and Muzin farewell, telling Almark that Wendy's room was next on their list. Wendy greeted Almark and Muzin at her door, asking what was wrong. Muzin, with Almark behind him, announced they were representatives of the Stay Behind group inspecting the dorms. Wendy informed them that her butler Ward would come to pick her up, and Almark promised to write her a letter upon arrival. Muzin excitedly asked if Almark was going to visit Wendy's house, and Wendy confirmed she would let them know a good day to visit. Kala, Wendy's roommate, overheard and expressed her wish to go too, but Wendy reminded Kala that she was returning to her own place. Muzin was ecstatic about the Burherb family mansion, while Kala also wanted to see it. Wendy modestly stated her family were just countryside nobles. Muzin cheekily told Kala that if she had a place to return to, she should go home properly, as this was a privilege reserved for lonely kids like them with no one to pick them up. Muzin then departed, saying he would wait for Wendy's letter and wondering where he should go next. Wendy called out to Almark, who was pondering his next move. Wendy informed Almark that she thought she would be leaving before noon the following day. She hesitated before speaking further. Wendy explained that since they wouldn't be able to meet for a while, she had a request. She shyly admitted she was hoping Almark would come to see her off, and Almark immediately agreed, saying of course he was going. Wendy was overjoyed by his response, exclaiming that it was great. Almark appeared flustered by Wendy's happy reaction. Muzin suddenly appeared, calling for Almark and declaring that next, they were going to Nelson's place. Almark and Wendy bid each other farewell, agreeing to meet tomorrow. Almark watched Wendy walk away. The next morning, while out on a walk, Almark noted the cooler air. He reflected on the amazing magical fireworks after the exam, and how everyone looked like they were having so much fun. However, he felt that he himself was still far from that level when he heard a sound and turned. Almark spotted Layla walking along the path. He greeted her, asking if she was heading back already or if someone was picking her up. She simply asked what he was doing there, and he replied he was just taking a walk. Layla stated that her family was waiting at the port, and Almark wished her to take care. As Layla walked away, Almark thought it looked like she was trying to avoid attention, recalling that Layla's family, the Cowgan house, was a renowned lineage known for producing ministers. He mused that politically, things seemed rather complicated, as the kingdom itself was almost like a branch family of the Forda kingdom, though he wasn't too interested in those details. Almark remembered Layla's previous words about not having much time. He concluded that Layla definitely had some complicated circumstances of her own, and decided he should head back. Almark observed a group of people, including Layla and a stern-looking man, Eld. From a window, Almark watched them, a faint smile on his face. He saw Layla run towards Eld, noting that Eld always lectured her. Layla embraced Eld, and Almark felt glad he could help her this time. Gazing out the window, Almark thought that if his father ever came to pick him up, it would be too late to regret not having put on his armor. Almark remembered his father's philosophy: never let your guard down no matter what and always prepare for the worst. He believed there was more to it than that. His father, Reyes, in his jet-black armor, carried an air of dignity and exuded an unspoken aura of authority and respect, even as a mercenary. As a child, Almark was proud of his father. Looking out the window again, Almark wondered what his father would wear if he were to come in 6 years, doubting even he would show up in armor then, and noticed Wendy wasn't there. Almark walked down the hall, thinking perhaps Wendy was still in her room. He then encountered Torque, who asked if his companion was also heading back, noting the companion didn't look too happy. Almark commented to Torque's companion that he wasn't that young anymore, but the companion retorted that they were still just kids. Torque added that besides, once they went back, reality in the form of their older brother and sister would be waiting for them whether they liked it or not. Torque's companion irritably told Torque that it wasn't something he should be telling Almark. Torque advised Almark, who was starting magic lessons after the break, to put his all into meditation practice and not drag them down. Almark admonished Torque's companion, calling him. Kala, Wendy's roommate, tried the door and wondered about Wendy, noting she hadn't seen her or her escort since morning. Kala explained to Almark and the others that Wendy took her key, so she might have gone out as each shared room has 2 keys. Almark thanked her and she wished them a safe trip back. Almark searched around, calling out for Wendy and wondering where she had gone. He saw Wendy's attendants with her butler, Ward, who were also wondering where she could have gone and what they should do. Almark approached Ward, asking if he was Wendy's escort, which Ward confirmed, then asked if Almark was one of her classmates. Ward introduced himself as the butler of the Burherb family and inquired if Almark knew Lady Wendy's whereabouts. Almark explained that Wendy wasn't in her room and that he, also from the same class, was looking for her too, to which Ward expressed concern. Almark suggested they might check around the school or the forest, and Ward considered it a possibility before Almark interjected with a sudden thought. Almark reasoned that since the school and forest were both far and in the same direction, he would check them out himself to prevent them from missing each other if they split up. He asked Ward and the attendants to wait there and ran off, with Ward expressing deep gratitude. Almark sprinted towards the forest, hoping they wouldn't miss each other. He soon spotted Wendy in the distance. Upon reaching her, Almark asked where she had been, informing her that Ward and the others were looking for her, which surprised Wendy as she hadn't realized it was so late. Wendy apologized for making him search for her, explaining she had just gone to the forest for a little while. Almark, looking concerned, told her they needed to hurry. Wendy called out to Ward upon their return. She apologized to Ward for misjudging the time, but he assured her there was no need to apologize and was just glad to see her well. Ward bowed deeply to Almark, expressing his gratitude and admiration for Almark's quick thinking, while Almark, flustered, asked him to stop, stating he was just a commoner. Ward dismissed Almark's concern, explaining that in this academy, there is no distinction between nobles and commoners, as all are equal as aspiring magicians. He added that their Lord Elmond had instructed them to treat all of Lady Wendy's classmates with respect. Almark thanked him, and Wendy apologized to Almark for causing him to worry. Ward suggested they head to the room and bid farewell to Master Almark, bowing once more. Almark stood by as Wendy and her party prepared to depart. Wendy turned to Almark, thanking him for waiting. Ward chimed in, saying he was actually thinking of inviting Almark and Musen to visit during the summer break, which sounded wonderful to Almark, who hoped it wouldn't trouble them. Ward insisted it was not his place to say, but urged them to please come. He declared that Lady Wendy's smile was the joy of the entire Burherb family, to which Almark simply said thank you. Almark then asked Wendy why she was in the forest earlier, and she replied that she went to look at some flowers. Wendy elaborated that it was a flower called swamp rose mallow, which only blooms in midsummer, so she had never seen it before. She saw something that looked like a bud and went to check, but it hadn't bloomed yet. Almark expressed surprise, admitting he didn't know Wendy liked flowers so much, while Wendy apologized for causing him trouble. Arriving at the gate, Wendy thanked Almark and said she would leave him there. Wendy promised to write Almark a letter, and he replied that he would be waiting. She wished him to take care on his way back, and he affirmed he would. Almark silently watched Wendy and her party depart. Ward informed Lady Wendy that it was about time to leave. Wendy thanked Almark for seeing her off, and he wished her well, saying he'd see her later. Almark watched as Wendy and her entourage walked away. He raised his hand in a final wave. Memories of Wendy surfaced, like her telling him to take care. He recalled her asking if he hadn't finished the textbook, and her cheerful suggestions to review lessons together, calling him Almark Kun and mentioning a practice wand. Wendy looked back, her eyes filled with emotion, and offered a heartfelt thank you. Almark suddenly called out her name, Wendy. Wendy's tear-filled eye widened slightly as she also exclaimed her thanks. Almark passionately declared that he was able to be there now like this, because of her, acknowledging that since the day he enrolled, she had been helping him all along. Almark continued to shout his gratitude, thanking Wendy so much as she walked further away through the gate. He waved energetically in farewell. Wendy paused for a moment, looking back. She offered Almark a warm, knowing smile before departing. Wendy waved cheerfully to Almark as she departed with Ward and her attendant. Almark watched them go for a moment before turning to find Jeed, the gate guard, standing there. Jeed greeted Almark, remarking that it had been a while. Jeed asked if that was Wendy just now, and Almark confirmed, with Jeed noting it marked the end for the lower division and thanking Almark for his hard work. Jeed remarked that for the guards, today was the toughest day of the year because everyone went home looking so happy, and even opening the gate was a struggle. Jeed observed that Almark wasn't going back, to which Almark confirmed. Almark stated that it didn't bother him, as he had prepared himself for this when he first came to the academy. He reflected that he had spent a year and a half traveling alone to get there, and wasn't going to feel like seeing his parents or wanting to go home after just a few months. His thoughts then turned to Layla, who had departed earlier. Almark asked Jeed if Layla was the first one to leave. Jeed confirmed that Layla was the first to leave that day, and added that Wallace had left the previous night, going home alone every year. Almark inquired about Wallace, remembering something from the night before. He recalled seeing a single light near the garden from Nelson's room and wondered if that was Wallace, musing that Wallace was a lot like him. Jeed mentioned that when Wallace enrolled, he also traveled alone from the western edge of Galay, advising Almark to watch out for tree spikes. Almark reflected that Wallace's enrollment age was around 9 years old, the same age he himself first went to the battlefield. Jeed admitted he didn't know the details and had never seen anyone come to pick Wallace up, prompting Almark to wonder why Wallace, a noble's son, would be alone. Almark speculated that perhaps, like Layla, Wallace had someone waiting at the port and conceded that the mystery deepened. Jeed inquired about Almark's life at the academy. Almark responded that thanks to everyone, he had completely gotten used to the lifestyle, though he admitted he still couldn't use magic at all, which Jeed acknowledged. Almark added that for about 5 days during the summer break, he would be visiting Wendy's estate with Muzin, an idea Jeed found splendid, saying Almark must be looking forward to it. Almark confirmed his excitement. Jeed nodded, saying he thought as much. Jeed remarked that compared to when he first met Almark, his expression had softened, making him seem like a completely different person. A few days later, Almark smiled gently, perhaps recalling Jeed's words. Muzin was dejected, exclaiming that his break had officially ended, while Almark sat at a desk. Suddenly, Almark burst into the room, announcing that a letter had arrived just a little while ago. Almark excitedly declared he was opening it, as Muzin watched from his bed. Almark found Muzin sulking in a corner and asked why he was there. Muzin explained that 12 days had passed since the break ended, and though they said they'd write, he thought it was strange. Almark, holding the now open letter, asked what it meant, while Muzin sniffled, stating it was obvious they couldn't go to the estate given the situation. The letter simply read, "Almark Muzin, I'm sorry." Almark read the brief and ominous message. Under the cover of night near an estate, a group of imposing men prepared for action. One announced it was time to get to work, another smirked menacingly, while an unseen person addressed someone as Milady. While Almark and Muzin were fishing, Muzin attempted to lift Almark's spirits, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation, especially after the previous day's events. Almark lamented that he really wanted to visit Wendy's place, and Muzin agreed. Almark began to read from Wendy's letter from the day before. The letter described Lord Elmond as a prominent noble expected to rise further, but who had consequently made many political enemies, and noted that suspicious individuals had recently been seen near the Burherb estate. The letter detailed further troubling incidents, including threatening letters and the discovery of small animal corpses at the estate gates, the intent of which was unclear. Lord Elmond, though not easily intimidated, was understandably concerned when it came to his beloved daughter, Wendy, who was separated from her parents upon her return home by her father's orders. Wendy had pleaded with her father to let her visit Garunther even briefly, but he remained resolute for her safety, causing her to express deep regret and apologize in the letter. The letter concluded by stating that Wendy was currently in the city of Myitus, located within the Burherb domain. Almark couldn't help but wonder about Wendy's current state of mind. Almark confessed that when things weren't going well, it felt like nothing else would work out either. Muzin observed that Almark was still dwelling on the situation, and hadn't seemed interested even when invited to go fishing. Muzin explained he had to forcefully bring Almark out to cheer him up, to which Almark conceded. Suddenly, Muzin exclaimed that the swamp rose mallow flowers were blooming beautifully nearby. Despite this, Almark expressed that his heart still felt heavy. Almark, intrigued by Muzin's earlier comment, asked him to repeat what he had said. Muzin confirmed he had mentioned Almark's heart feeling gray, but then reiterated that the swamp rose mallows were blooming beautifully. Almark's demeanor changed instantly, and he eagerly asked where the flowers were blooming. Muzin pointed towards the blooming flowers. Almark, seeing them, agreed with Muzin's assessment. He admired the beauty of the swamp rose mallow flowers. Muzin mentioned that the beautiful flowers also bloomed near his home, while Almark, who had heard they bloomed on Nork Island, was seeing them for the first time there. Almark expressed that this was the first time he had ever seen such a flower, as it was his first summer in the southern regions. The thought of showing the flower to Wendy came to Almark's mind. With newfound resolve, Almark declared his intention to show the flower to Wendy, prompting Muzin to ask where they were going. Back in Almark's room, looking over a borrowed map of the Galay Kingdom, Almark outlined the journey to Myitus. 2 days from Nork Island to Garunther, then 2 more days to Wendy's location via the King's Road White Carriage, a 4-day trip in total. Muzin exclaimed in disbelief at the mention of the King's Road white carriage, questioning its immense cost, especially for children. Almark explained that without the white carriage, a normal carriage would take 5 days to Myitus, making it a 7-day journey including the trip to Garunthar, and while the fare would be less, food costs would accumulate, though he himself didn't mind camping. Muzin was horrified at the thought of camping for days, sighing in exasperation. Muzin pointed out that his allowance could barely afford a round trip to the capital, and asked Almark if he had a more feasible plan. The narrative explained that the King's Road spanned the entire Galai Kingdom, featuring checkpoints for maintenance and safety, with the white carriage operating on its exclusive lanes. The white carriage utilized magical metal horses, created with advanced Galai Kingdom technology, which never tired and traveled at over twice the speed of regular carriages, revolutionizing travel. Despite its advantages, the fares for the white carriage were more than 10 times those of an ordinary carriage, effectively making it transportation for the wealthy. Almark announced his intention to use that trick, to which Muzin questioned what he meant. Almark instructed Muzin to accompany him to the school building. Muzin, perplexed by Almark's sudden action, asked what he was planning to do, wondering if it involved the reference room, while Almark cryptically replied he would understand when they got there. Muzin expressed his regret at following Almark as they approached Headmaster Jorg, who seemed lost in thought before Almark's sudden exclamation of "Oh no." Almark boldly declared to Headmaster Jorg his desire to go to Myitus and requested money, leaving Jorg momentarily stunned. Muzin reflected that he had only ever seen Almark this serious during formal occasions, and was astounded by his reckless behavior. Headmaster Jorg acknowledged his prior offer to help Almark with money, but remarked that the requested sum was quite substantial. Jorg then asked Almark and Muzin for their reason to travel to Myitus, to which Almark questioned if it would be a problem. Almark stated with some tension that their purpose was to see a friend. He elaborated that their friend Wendy must be feeling very lonely, and he wished to show her the swamp rose mallow flowers from Nork Island, as she had expressed a strong desire to see them. Almark explained that he lacked the necessary funds, and believed the King's Road white carriage was the safest travel option, hence his request for financial assistance. He added that if his request couldn't be met, he would find an alternative solution, while Muzin clutched his stomach in anxiety. Headmaster Jorg, discerning that Almark was not lying, stated that if Almark needed the money, he had no reason to refuse. He then permitted Almark to go and meet his friend, much to Almark's and Muzin's surprise. However, Jorg set a condition. No detours were allowed, and they must return to school promptly after completing their objective. Overjoyed and somewhat startled, Almark and Muzin profusely thanked the headmaster and hastily departed. As they left, Headmaster Jorg quietly acknowledged the situation to himself. Headmaster Jorg reflected that if events were fated to unfold this way, then they must also strengthen their determination. Almark and Muzin received a box of money from a clerk, who instructed them to ensure its return later. Muzin was astounded by the large sum of money Almark had obtained. Muzin praised Almark, noting the money should cover their round trip, and expressed his excitement for his first white carriage ride, while Almark was busy with calculations. Almark agreed it was time to prepare for their departure. Muzin enthusiastically suggested they go shopping in town, saying he would get his money, to which Almark agreed. In another location, an attendant was giving a report to a nobleman. The nobleman addressed the attendant regarding Lord Elman's affairs. The nobleman intensely questioned the attendant about the fate of Elman's daughter, demanding information. The attendant informed the nobleman that due to previous arrangements, Elman's daughter had been relocated to Myitus, which the nobleman acknowledged as good news. The nobleman then inquired about the status of the reserve soldiers, and was told they were already on their way to Myitus. The nobleman instructed his attendant to wait a few days for the newly arrived soldiers to lower their guard before taking action. Meanwhile, Almark and Muzin declared that they had arrived at their destination. Upon reaching Rilpda port, Muzin cheered while Almark felt a sense of nostalgia. Almark revealed he had worked at the port for a month before attending the academy, which surprised Muzin. Almark explained that he had spent all his travel money before arriving and had to earn his ship fare, earning only a third of an adult's wage, acknowledging that Muzin, whose family was also poor, likely faced similar hardships. Almark approached the ticket seller and requested 2 tickets to Garunthar. The ticket seller accepted the payment and told them to hurry aboard. Inside the carriage, Muzin was amazed by their speed, while Almark informed him they would reach Garunthar by noon the next day. Muzin, looking out, wondered if they had already arrived. The driver told Muzin not to talk nonsense. The driver clarified that Garunthar was still ahead and would be an impressive sight upon arrival, but for now, everything around them was still Garunthar's outskirts. The driver warned them to be careful, as Garunthar was a bustling place with many different kinds of people, to which Almark agreed. Muzin then spotted another carriage nearby. The driver commented that it seemed all roads indeed led to Garunthar. He announced they were going to speed up, explaining that arriving later than the other carriage would mean a long wait at the station. The driver energetically urged his passengers to hold on tight. Almark shouted at Muzin to hold on and not just stare, warning him of the danger of falling, as Muzin let out a surprised yelp. The driver announced their arrival, stating the journey wasn't too bad. Muzin, despite his sore behind, was thrilled they had secured second place, while Almark mused about the carriage's durability and their upcoming white carriage ride. The driver, mentioning they had camped outside, found it hard to gauge their wealth, directed them to the boarding area, and invited them to use his service again. Muzin spotted a food stall and exclaimed that the food looked delicious. He pointed out another enticing dish, a steaming pot of stew. A vendor offered Muzin a tasty-looking skewer, promising a bonus. Muzin happily indulged in various foods, declaring everything delicious, while Almark questioned if he could eat everything he was buying, to which Muzin confidently replied he could. Almark, somewhat exasperated, urged Muzin to hurry to the white carriage's boarding area. They reached the luxurious white carriage waiting area. Muzin felt intimidated by the fancy surroundings, while Almark approached an attendant to ask about the Myitus route. The attendant informed them that the Myitus route had already left that morning, but an alternative, the Linovese route, would be available the following morning. Almark thanked the attendant, who advised them to purchase a ticket and return the next morning. Muzin, complaining of soreness, suggested camping outside again, but Almark, noting the crowds, deemed it too dangerous and proposed staying at an inn. Almark explained that in the city, respectable travelers stay in inns, while only scoundrels camp outdoors, warning Muzin about the risk of thugs if he chose to camp, recalling a sentimental memory of their turf. Muzin, thoroughly spooked by Almark's warning, agreed they should stay at a proper inn. They decided to inquire about an inn near the waiting area, with Almark leaving the task to Muzin. Almark successfully secured a room for two for one night from the innkeeper, who informed him it was the last one on the second floor and that dinner was served in the adjoining tavern. Inside their room, Muzin remarked that the accommodation was less expensive than he had anticipated. Almark suggested they head to dinner early while it was still quiet, and Muzin agreed. Muzin declared he could eat again despite having eaten a lot earlier, having walked a fair distance since then, which impressed Almark. The tavern was noisy and crowded with patrons. Some patrons commented on the current crowd, expecting it to worsen later in the evening, and planned to leave after their meal. Another patron agreed, observing Almark and Muzin seated in a corner. A waitress apologized for the wait and served them their soup. After finishing their meal, Almark requested the payment from the waitress, thanking her. Almark's attention was drawn to a group of men at a nearby table. Almark identified one of the men as a mercenary, noting his food was piping hot. He recognized the distinct smell, associating it with someone who had served as a mercenary in the north. While eating, Almark mused that the men still possessed a soldierly demeanor, an aura that lingered. The mercenaries at the nearby table exuded a menacing presence. A disturbance occurred at the mercenaries' table, with one apologizing for breaking something, while another dismissed it. Muzin, clearly uncomfortable with the rowdy mercenaries, urged Almark to finish eating so they could retreat to their room. Muzin noticed Almark's serious expression and asked what was wrong, commenting on his frightening demeanor. Almark apologized for his expression. He revealed that he had overheard one of the mercenaries utter the name Burherb. Almark recognized Burherb as Wendy's family name spoken by the northern soldiers and feared their intentions could mean trouble for Wendy. Almark quietly asked Muzin to try and overhear the conversation of the three men at the table behind them. Almark explained that the men had mentioned Burherb, which Muzin recognized as Wendy's family name, prompting Almark to hush him. Almark seemed distressed, thinking about Wendy being part of the great Galai nobility. Almark urged Muzin to listen, stating he could tell the men were northerners like himself and also mercenaries. Muzin was taken aback by the revelation that they were mercenaries. Muzin wondered what mercenaries would be doing in the south, as the wars were primarily in the north. Almark explained that mercenaries handled various tasks, including defending villages, hunting monsters, and even assassinations. Muzin recalled Wendy mentioning assassinations in her letter, further deepening his concern. Almark recalled that Wendy's letter mentioned men hired by Lord Elman's political rivals were lurking near the mansion. Almark voiced his suspicion that the mercenaries they overheard might be those very culprits. Muzin gulped, acknowledging the gravity of the coincidence. Almark admitted it could be unrelated, but he had a strong premonition and needed to know what the mercenaries were talking about. Almark encouraged Muzin to use his voice hunting technique, though Muzin expressed doubts about his ability, citing his weakness in wind magic and lack of a staff. Almark emphasized the potential danger to Wendy and his own inability to use magic, placing his trust in Muzin. Motivated by concern for Wendy, Muzin reluctantly agreed to attempt the technique. Muzin took a deep, nervous breath, preparing himself. Muzin focused intensely on his bread, beginning a faint chant for his voice hunting technique. Almark had to correct Muzin, who was initially focusing on the wrong group of people, directing him to the mercenaries' table. With a wheeze and a poof, Muzin managed to redirect his focus, and Almark confirmed he had the right target. Muzin strained, explaining to Almark that their voices were very faint, but this was the extent of his current ability. Almark urged him to listen carefully, and Muzin confirmed he had it. Almark, understanding the difficulty, silently asked Wendy for assistance, feeling he had no other option. Almark intently listened, asking if one of the mercenaries had just mentioned Wendy. Muzin, sweating with effort, reported that he was beginning to understand their conversation, picking up words about clothes and legs, while Almark urged him to persevere. Muzin relayed snippets of their plan. They could only wait just 3 more days depending on movements, as long as they continued their part. Almark commended Muzin for his improved accuracy and suggested they try to shift the mercenaries' focus towards them. Muzin, startled, relayed the horrifying statement he overheard. The mercenaries discussed that if those guys killed the Wendy girl, their job would also be finished. Almark stared in shock. Almark confirmed that the mercenaries were indeed talking about killing Wendy. Almark pieced together the situation. The 3 mercenaries were at their current location in Garunther, harassing the mansion in Myitus where Wendy Burherb was, and there seemed to be a separate assassin unit, all treating the act of killing as a mere job. Muzin agreed that the mercenaries were terrible, and Almark declared he could not forgive them. Almark expressed his disdain, stating he didn't want people like that in their Galai kingdom. Muzin conceded that mercenaries exist due to their employers. Muzin then asked Almark what they should do about Wendy. Almark explained the challenges. Even if they wanted to inform Lord Elman, the mansion was within the city walls, requiring a lengthy inspection to enter, and currently no one at the Burherb mansion knew them, but he was resolved that they had to save her. Almark concluded that attempting to send a message or directly approach would be ineffective and too slow. The best course of action to protect Wendy was to proceed to Myitus themselves. Muzin wondered what they would do upon arrival, and Almark explained they would inform Wardson of the mercenaries' plan, thereby reinforcing defenses and thwarting their interference. Almark reasoned that if the mercenaries discovered their plan was exposed, they would likely avoid taking unnecessary risks. Almark deduced that since the white carriage was scheduled to arrive the day after tomorrow, and the mercenaries mentioned 3 more days, if this referred to the estate's pharmaceutical supply, they should be able to reach Myitus in time. Muzin passionately declared that as a man, he couldn't abandon a girl in distress. Almark, noting Muzin's quick agreement, decided they should get some sleep so as not to miss their ride. Riding the white carriage, Muzin exclaimed at its incredible speed, which Almark acknowledged was expected. Almark commented that the Northern Reserve soldiers were reliable, then asked Muzin if he was still troubled by the previous day's events. Muzin confessed his worry for Wendy and his hope that they would arrive in Myitus quickly. Almark observed that Muzin, despite his words, seemed quite relaxed on the carriage's fluffy seats. Muzin clarified that he was indeed worried, but preferred not to dwell excessively on negative thoughts. He explained that he wasn't particularly clever, so overthinking didn't resolve his worries. Sometimes, solutions simply presented themselves if they carried on as usual. Almark, hearing a commotion from nearby, turned to look. Muzin told Almark he was strong, though Almark might not realize it, and that he himself didn't really understand, exclaiming, "My lady, absolutely not." A young lady was scolding her attendant, insisting it was his fault because their white carriage had already left. She angrily questioned if he had checked properly, and it seemed she was a young lady from a good family who had forgotten something. The attendant looked weary, likely finding the long journey with the young lady to be a tough and stressful job. Almark asked if they had forgotten something, to which the attendant seemed to agree. The attendant apologized for the disturbance, explaining that the issue concerned them. The young lady's Myitus was missing. The young lady Lilte tearfully explained that Myitus wasn't just any stuffed animal but her dearly beloved teddy bear, and she was terribly sorry for the fuss. Muzin initially mistook Myitus for a cat. Muzin asked why Myitus was missing. The attendant explained they had left Myitus behind at the Garunther estate, and Muzin, holding some fabric, realized he had mistaken it for the missing item, which was actually among leftover sewing materials. The attendant clarified that, for some reason, the fabric had ended up in the lady's bag instead of Myitus, and Muzin asked to see the fabric. Lilte offered the fabric to Muzin, much to his surprise. Almark asked the attendant if it was okay, and the attendant confirmed, leading Almark to tell Muzin not to hold back. Almark observed Muzin working with the fabric. Almark questioned Muzin about his intentions with the fabric, to which Muzin nonchalantly replied, "Nothing really." The attendant remarked that children often calm down simply by being listened to, a lesson he learned from his own sister, which Lilte seemed to acknowledge. Almark cautioned Muzin against getting too deeply involved in the situation. Muzin pointed out that Almark was the one behaving unusually today. Muzin reminded Almark that he was typically the first to offer assistance when someone was in trouble. Muzin expressed his understanding that Almark was worried about Wendy, suggesting that Almark's greater exposure to frightening experiences made him worry more. Muzin proudly displayed his creation, a small bear fashioned from the fabric, complete with hands, feet, and ears, which Almark found amazing. Muzin asked Almark to get him a pen from his bag, which Almark retrieved from his pocket. Muzin mentioned that he often made similar items for his sister. Lilte, delighted, called the handmade bear cute, while Almark was impressed by Muzin's unexpected talent, though Muzin downplayed it. Muzin called out to Lilte, offering her the bear. He presented it to her, saying it might not be as cute as her Myitus. Lilte, touched by the gesture, accepted the bear, suggesting she take it with her on the journey, and declared it adorable, much to Muzin's and Almark's pleasure. Muzin proudly declared the bear his masterpiece and inquired about its name. Almark proposed the name Kuma-chan, which was met with hesitation from Muzin and Lilte. Lilte found Kuma-chan too plain and wanted a cuter name, while Muzin felt it was an unfair name for his masterpiece, leading to great disapproval. Almark looked on, somewhat taken aback. Lilte announced she would name the bear Will, designating him as Myitus's younger brother. Muzin and Almark thought a younger brother was a nice idea, and Lilte suggested they all chat together. Lilte formally introduced herself as Muriel and the bear as Will. Muriel's attendant inquired about Almark and Muzin's names. Muriel, delighted by their company, pleaded with Muzin to continue riding with them to Rinov's, as they were having such a good time. Almark, however, declined, stating he refused. Almark explained that while he would love to, he couldn't accompany them further. Muriel, sniffing sadly, told Will to consider himself as Almark. Muriel comforted Will, saying it was all right because she was there with him. Muriel lovingly embraced Will, declaring her affection for him. Almark declared that he now understood Muzin's point. He explained that Muzin had helped him realize that regardless of his anxiety, the white carriage's speed wouldn't change and their arrival time in Myitus was fixed. It was a simple truth he had overlooked, and thus, it was better to concentrate on the present moment. Muzin, blushing slightly, clarified that he wasn't trying to be profound or call Almark smart. He simply believed in addressing frightening situations as they arose. Almark expressed his agreement with Muzin's sentiment. Muriel, overhearing their conversation, chimed in that she too would start focusing on enjoyable thoughts, while her attendant looked on. Almark informed Muzin that they would be staying overnight in a town named Bora, proposing they find an inn and get properly cleaned up. Muzin enthusiastically agreed, noting it was a large town that might even have a public bathhouse, and added that it would be impolite to meet someone while smelly from camping. They agreed to find some delicious food first when they arrived in Bora. Almark suggested they gather many stories as souvenirs for Wendy, who was likely feeling disheartened, an idea Muzin endorsed. Muzin expressed his eagerness to see Wendy, a sentiment Almark shared. Both Almark and Muzin looked forward to their reunion with Wendy as their journey continued. 9 days had passed since Wendy arrived at the Myitus estate, sighing with resignation. Though meant as a break, she felt confined, unable to even run around under the summer sun. Her father had ordered her to Myitus, where all she did was read and study, despite wanting to go horseback riding or have a picnic. Ward had gravely informed her that her life was being targeted, making leaving the estate out of the question. Wendy understood Ward's concern for her, which was why she couldn't argue, and apologized for being selfish. The most difficult thing for her was the realization that she could no longer invite Almark and Muzin to the Garunther estate. Her father had firmly denied her request. Wendy had pleaded with her father for just a little more time at Garunther. She had begged her mother to understand her feelings. Her father had insisted, saying he didn't want anything to happen to her, and she noticed her mother, usually so strong, looking completely worn out. Wendy attributed her mother's exhaustion to the constant harassment they were enduring. Understanding her parents' distress, Wendy had accepted their decision. She now wondered if her apology letters had reached both Almark and Muzin. Wendy fretted that Muzin must be very disappointed, especially since he had been staying alone at the academy during the break. She remembered how his face had lit up when she invited him to her estate. She had genuinely wanted him to come to show him around, eat delicious food together, and see his pure, innocent happiness. Unsure if he would forgive her, she resolved to write another apology letter once things settled down. And then there was Almark. She wondered what Almark, that mysterious boy who suddenly came from the far north, thought about the situation. Wendy recalled knowing Almark planned to train during his break and hadn't seemed enthusiastic, but she invited him anyway because she wanted him to see her home. More than anything, she wanted him to meet her family. She hated the thought of not seeing him for 2 months, and remembered Almark's troubled expression when she invited him. So she had deliberately made a sad face, confident he would then agree to come. She mused that perhaps spending the break alone was her punishment for making him feel so troubled. Wendy wondered if Almark felt any disappointment after reading her letter, or if he simply accepted it with a small smile, thinking it couldn't be helped, and that was the end of it. She considered that he might be spending his days meditating as part of his training, perhaps not even thinking about her anymore. She lamented that she had done something truly terrible to both of them, and if Almark didn't react to her letter at all, it would mean she was never that important to him, a reality she wasn't ready to face. She thought that if she had known things would turn out like this, she never should have invited them in the first place. Suddenly, she noticed a shadow outside her window. Then she heard someone talking and laughing, and the figures looked somewhat like Almark and Muzin. Wendy chided herself, believing she must be imagining it, as they should be on Nork Island and looked like Almark and Muzin. Heavy footsteps approached, as she reasoned that traveling all this way would cost a fortune. She concluded there was no way they would come all this way, just as Ward called out, asking if the young lady was there. Wendy wondered what had gotten into Ward, thinking he didn't need to shout like that. Ward called out again much louder, as Wendy thought she could hear him perfectly fine. Ward burst into the room, looking flustered, to announce that her friends had arrived. He specifically stated that Lord Almark and Lord Muzin were here. Wendy, tears streaming down her face, insisted it had to be a lie. She whispered that it was a lie. She couldn't believe it, reasoning that even with a fast carriage and horse, it would take 4 whole days to reach her. As she rushed out, thinking it must be a dream, Ward tried to calm her down. Wendy hurried down the stairs, the whole situation feeling unreal, her mind racing with thoughts of how terribly she had treated them. She could hear their voices as she descended. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, she saw Almark and Muzin. Muzin greeted her cheerfully, exclaiming it had been a long time, and Wendy, overcome with emotion, confirmed that it was indeed them. Wendy, overwhelmed, ran towards them, tackling Muzin in a hug, much to Almark's and Ward's surprise. Muzin, on the ground, remarked that it was a good thing he had his bag on to cushion the impact. Almark apologized for their sudden arrival, explaining that they had read her letter and really wanted to see her, so they just came on their own, asking if it was a bother. Wendy, still crying and clinging to Muzin, mumbled an apology as Almark looked on and Muzin tried to comfort her. At the dining table, Muzin enthusiastically declared the food delicious, praising its aroma and beautiful colors beyond just its appearance, while Wendy, smiling, expressed her gladness and offered more if he was still hungry. Muzin elaborated that sometimes one judges things by their appearance, only to eat them and realize they are not what they seemed. He turned to Almark, asking if he agreed it wasn't like that, to which Almark, with a slight smile, told him to swallow his food before speaking. Muzin, mouthful, expressed his surprise at Almark's unexpected comment about the delicious food, while Wendy chuckled, saying he didn't have to throw it to her. Earlier, before the meal, Almark had been concerned, admitting to himself that he didn't know table manners and this was bad. Muzin, in contrast, had boldly declared he would only use 1 fork, prompting Almark to think how manly Muzin was. Wendy and Ward couldn't help but laugh, with Wendy commenting that his behavior was so typically Muzin. Ward, also chuckling, observed that Muzin looked like he was having fun and expressed his gladness that they had come. Wendy mused that Muzin had a natural ability to put people's hearts at ease,